your local 50K, in the park nearby, or
Yeah.
it's likely that some of these local races go through terrain that you might not be able to go to on your own either, because often they go through private land where they've gotten special permission, they've gotten permits to do that. And so doing these races sometimes, if you choose them right, it is an opportunity to go to places that you might not be allowed to go.
Welcome to the Zero Quit Podcast, where we bring you inside the minds of elite athletes, business owners, specialists, and other creatives. I'm your host, Covington, and through these conversations, you'll hear practical advice and effective strategies for optimizing not only your performance, but also your habits and routines as well. If you enjoy the show, be sure to subscribe and share it with a friend. What's going on, guys? So today, I have the pleasure of having on Jeff. I just learned the last name, Pelletier.
Yeah, close enough.
There we go. Jeff, close enough. Jeff Pelletier. He's an ultra runner and filmmaker based in Vancouver. In addition to managing his own video production agency, he makes incredible videos and in storytelling on his YouTube channel, where he captures a lot of his races and adventures that he does across the world. What's going on, man?
How you doing, Brock? Thanks for having me on. Excited to have this conversation today.
Absolutely. It's funny because I followed you for about, I think, a year and a half. And as I was doing a little bit more research for the podcast, I remembered how I stumbled upon your channel in the first place, because although you have like a great audience, I think it's very like under appreciated in a sense, as far as like the audience size and things like that. And I originally found you from it was like top 6 headlights or choosing a headlamp for ultra running, things like that. And so I stumbled upon it, but I'm glad I did, just because, again, it's different kind of filmmaking and take on YouTube than something like Billy Yang or some of these other running documentarians that cover these bigger projects and races. But you do a really great job of capturing, as we were just talking about before the podcast, lesser known races and your own adventures in a really high quality format. And recently, I want to kind of kick things off with the race you just wrapped up recently. I think it's pronounced Azores Islands, right?
Yeah, the Azores Islands off the
There you
coast.
go.
They're Portuguese islands off the coast of Portugal. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had never heard of them before. I was telling my wife about them just because, I remember when you first posted a little snippet of, where you were racing months ago. And I was like, man, these are just beautiful and stunning. And I was like, as much as I feel like people in the racing community glorify UTMB, there's so many of these other different destinations across the country, and this just seemed like one of them. So I guess give us a little introduction to that race. What was the structure of it? What was the distance, and what drew you to it in the first place?
Yeah, so the Azores Islands, they're considered the Hawaii of the Atlantic, the Hawaiian Islands of the Atlantic. Growing up in Vancouver here, Hawaii is a pretty popular destination. It's like a 4-hour flight, or a 5-hour flight rather. And it turns out it's also a 5-hour flight from Toronto, the other side of Canada, with direct flights to the Azores Islands. And they're beautiful. I'm surprised more people don't go, but they literally are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, 1,800 kilometers off the coast of Canada, and still 1,200 kilometers off the coast of Portugal. So really in the middle of the ocean. It's a place of waterfalls. It's lush greenery. It's unlike some of the other islands around the area that are volcanic, but these are actually quite lush. And I was invited to go by the race organization. So I was invited to go do a race there. I did a 60K race. They also had a 110 kilometer and a 35 kilometer distance. And I met the race director, Lewis, at UTMB, actually, during doing a shakeout run. He had been following my channel for a while, and that's where I met him. And he invited me, and then we talked a little bit after that. So I like to mix it up. I like to do these big races. I mean, UTMB is it's an epic race. It's a bucket list race for sure.
Yeah.
Always has been at the top of my list. But I love doing these little unknown events. And I guess more specifically, I like traveling to places that are a little bit less popular. I mean, the Azores Islands, I'm sure, are popular for Portuguese people and maybe French people to visit, but not a lot of North Americans had even heard of it. So as far as telling a story and featuring it in a film, it's pretty exciting. It's a good opportunity to introduce an audience to a new place. And I sometimes get feedback from people saying, like, when they watch my films, it's just like, oh, there's another place for the bucket list, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just another bucket list. And that I love to hear that. That's my goal. I want you to be able to binge my films and just learn about and discover new places, new races, new adventures to take on that maybe you hadn't heard of before. Yeah,
well, you kind of drew me into a question I was going to ask later, was kind of like, what is your why for a lot of the races you choose and a lot of the things you film? And I think, you can jump off what I'm about to add here is that it seems that you guide towards these places that not just are these big races, but like you said, the lesser known ones that are in these distinct locations that also have a culture and like a story to tell. Specifically the ones that, I want to dig way more into this later, but you did the one in Namibia. And there's just such a different environment that you're kind of immersed into, especially when you do these stage races where you're not just in and out. So I guess, what is it about racing the planet and those collection of races and exploring the world that trail running has kind of given you the opportunity to do?
Yeah, and I mean, and that's really it. Like, trail running has given me this opportunity to visit places. I would even just say more locally. I mean, for us, locally, we consider the United States being fairly local. We can drive down to Washington, Oregon pretty easily in a weekend, and trail running takes you to places even within your state. If you're American, it can take you to towns that you would never visit. Because the race usually isn't in Seattle or Denver. It's in Silverton. It's in this old mining town, or it's in so you visit these places that you would never go to otherwise, way off the beaten path, and you learn and you get immersed in a culture and a history that again you would never be exposed to. So trail running is a great opportunity to explore your own backyard through a different lens, or to take that to the next level and explore countries you might never go to, and again in ways you might not be able to do. So Namibia was one example of that with Racing the Planet, where we ran through the desert for 250 kilometers. And of course, if you visit Namibia, it's a very friendly place to visit. They call it Africa for beginners. But you wouldn't normally travel that far into the desert, right?
Yeah.
So this is something you can only do with a support structure, with an organization who is setting up aid stations, providing water. I mean, there's no water out there, right? So even as an adventurer myself, I wouldn't be able to go and just fast pack that route. I wouldn't be able to carry enough water. So that's a really unique experience and a unique chance to explore a region of that country that I wouldn't have otherwise. And of course, while I'm there, I did do all the regular tourist stuff.
Yeah.
But even the country of Namibia wasn't even on my radar before, seeing that this organization had a race there and deciding to join them for that. Racing the Planet is a unique organization in that sense because their mission, their mandate really is to take people to these really unique locations. Usually deserts. They're going to the country of Jordan this year, but they also go to Mongolia. They go to the Atacama Desert in Chile. They go to Antarctica. So they take people to places that you wouldn't normally go. And that's very different than running something like UTMB, which is a very popular route on the Tour de Mont Blanc. We did fast pack that route this summer before doing the race. But you certainly don't need to race UTMB to do the Tour de Mont Blanc. Again, unlike some of these other races. And even on a smaller scale, I mean, your local 50K, in the park nearby, it's likely that some of these local races go through terrain that you might not be able to go to on your own either, because often they go through private land where they've gotten special permission. They've gotten permits to do that. And so doing these races sometimes, if you choose them right, it is an opportunity to go to places that you might not be allowed to go on your own outside of an organized environment.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head, and it really made me think of why I chose, like my first ultra marathon that I did over this past, or I guess one summers in the fall, I did a 50-miler in a smaller mountain town called Crested Butte. Have you heard of that in Colorado?
Yeah,
okay,
for sure.
Yeah, so it's lesser known than a Silverton, a Telluride, Uray, these beautiful small mountain towns in Colorado, but it certainly holds its own, and it's a good, trail running gives you the excuse to go to these, secluded areas, these really kind of special places, and like you said, to run in areas that you may not actually even be allowed to at times. And so it was a good chance for me to have an excuse to go run 50 miles through, beautiful mountains, beautiful terrain. The trees are just this vivid yellow, this bright green, beautiful fall weather. And although it hailed and wild storms during the race, there's plenty of sunshine. It's just part of the experience, right? And, it just takes you places, simply put. But I wanted to bring it back to the Azores Islands. So this race didn't quite go as planned. So dive into that story and mention, I guess, the weather conditions, how it went, and your takeaways from it.
Yeah, so I, in addition to visiting places that are maybe a little bit lesser known, I like to go in the off season typically. And this race definitely was in the off season. It was in December, and it was winter there. I mean, winter there is it's about 15 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but I was running in shorts and a t-shirt and then a hard shell when it rained. but it did rain a lot, and it does tend to rain there in the winter. They have ferries that go between the islands, but only in the summer, because in the winter the waves are too high, the wind is too unpredictable, the weather's just too unpredictable, so they cancel the ferries for the season. So that's an indication of sort of the potential for weather. And unfortunately, we had a really bad bout of about a week worth of wind and rain that I'm told is an anomaly. Usually you get a couple days of rain and then a couple days of sunshine. I had a couple days of sunshine when I arrived, and then nothing but rain and wind for the rest of the time.
Of course.
Which, hey, I'm used to that coming from Vancouver, Canada.
That's
we
right.
have a lot of rain. But it got pretty muddy, and they had to reroute the course. It was so windy. We're talking 75 kilometer per hour winds. It was pretty hectic. But it was fun. Like it made it a lot of fun.
Well, sometimes I'll say that kind of takes the stress away. Like, my 50-mile race, around like 25 miles, I passed an aid station, and I was kind of in that point where I was like holding on to, okay, I'm gonna still finish and finish the race, but I was teetering a little bit, and then this hailstorm moves in, and it was kind of like one of those moments where I just said, oh, what the hell, I'm already like hurting. It is what it is. This just adds to it, so it almost like releases you from that stress and gives you a little bit of, well, I'm already here anyway, right?
Exactly, yeah. Kind of like with this race, it got to a point where it was just kind of silly. Like it felt like here we are just playing in the mud, and so expectations went out the window, and I just thought, okay, well, it'll make for a good story. It'll make for a good film. Just have fun. Unfortunately, I missed a turn, a critical turn. Our 60K course, followed the 110 kilometer course exactly. Aside from one little part where we're supposed to do an additional 4K loop. And I missed that turn. I went back to see where I missed. I went back with Lewis, the RD, and he showed me the intersection. I'm like, well, it's so obvious. He said, yeah, there would have been arrows here. But I think at that point, it's because we were on this ridge, and I was getting blown off the ridge. I'm trying to hold my hat on, and just anything I could do to basically stay vertical. And so I think I was probably distracted a little bit. The irony being that I had the route on my watch, but I think my watch was it was probably beeping, and I probably couldn't hear it in the wind. So
I mean, that'll end up having a lot of disorientation anyway. But did I read it right that this was your first DNF?
Well, my first DQ.
Yeah. Oh, DQ.
First DQ.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess technically DNF, but I was disqualified because I only ran 55K instead of the full 60.
Okay. Because I was going to be surprised if that was your first DNF, and I was going to ask, like, what was that, I guess, experience when you had a lot of success? But I guess regardless, what were the takeaways from this race, other than that it was a beautiful area and an event to live through anyway?
Well, I mean, I think I was upset with myself, feeling sorry for myself for a bit after that, until the next day, and I realized, it can happen to anybody. I was a little bit embarrassed because I was invited to do the race, and I'm telling this story on the video, but then I thought, well, it'll make for a good, it'll make for a good story. So, and I kind of let myself off the hook, and I realized, like, this is just part of trail running. I mean, it's troubleshooting. It's it's kind of rolling with the punches, and you never know what you're going to get. DNFs, DQs, missing a turn. This is all just part of the fun. And if you want a perfectly flagged, good weather, if you want to eliminate the variables, run a road race, run a marathon.
Yeah.
Ultra running's not about that. It's about just going out there and doing your best with what you're given on the day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And a perspective I had going into my race too, because I was teetering and nerves were there about 50K or 50 miler. And, one thing I came to that I think applies to what you just talked about is the idea that, running is more than just that medal at the finish line. It's the experience of the race. It's seeing how far you can take yourself, and that, whether you finished the race or whether, you were a mile short or something like that, or missed a turn, you still got the crux of why you wanted to do the race and the value in it in the first place, right?
Yeah, and I did go back a couple days later and run the part that I missed,
exactly.
So I got to see it on fresh legs and with fresh eyes, and and it's like I always say, it gives me something to go back for, right? It gives me a reason maybe to go back and run the race again.
Exactly. So you do a ton of overseas races. Obviously, there's some great races and trails around where you live in Canada, but with all the overseas races that you do, what kind of goes into that preparation? Because one thing that I just think of is like, whether you're going for a week or this, there's so many items to pack, so much gear to pack, extra socks, extra, gels, all these different things. So I guess, walk us through what are some of the tips you have, or the horror stories you've ran into, or the trouble you've had with flying with some of these items.
Yeah, no, and it definitely does complicate things, starting with the fact that, again, most of us do more of our racing in our backyard, say you're driving for a few hours, maybe maximum. But the idea is you're driving, so you're filling your trunk up with stuff. So you want to bring spare shoes, throw them in the trunk. You want to bring spare poles, throw them in there. Food, whatever, just throw it all in there. But even for us as Canadians crossing the border to do a lot of our racing, sometimes just over the border, we might drive a couple hours. We have to think about what food we're importing, right? So right away, it gets complicated. And as soon as you hop on a plane, it's exponentially more complicated, because now you have baggage allowances. There's certain things you can't pack in your checked luggage, like lithium batteries, which includes headlamp batteries. But at the same time, you can't bring poles in your carry-on, so you got to check those. So things can get pretty complicated pretty quickly, especially when you deal with lost luggage. And that's where, you have to really think about, you always wear your running shoes on the plane, for example, and you carry on your essential kit. And you really have to maybe research in advance, what items are available on the ground. When I raced in the country of Georgia this summer, somebody had lost some luggage and lost some gear items, and we were scrambling to try to help them find stuff. And unfortunately, in Georgia, in Tbilisi, the capital, they do have some outdoor stores, but there's not a lot available. They import a lot of their things. They order on Amazon. There certainly weren't calf sleeves and things that he was hoping to find. And so it's definitely a consideration. My rule of thumb for traveling internationally, especially when for us traveling through time zones, say coming from Vancouver to going to the Alps, say that's a nine hour difference, is to always go about a week early. If you go about a week early, you give yourself time to adjust to the time zone. They say it takes about a day per hour, but also you give yourself a week to arrive, relax, kind of gather yourself, and if need be, spend a few days scrambling to find lost gear items if your baggage is lost. If you arrive a day or two before, you're kind of screwed. You have no time for that. So if you can afford it, you got to give yourself that week. It just gives you time to settle in and make sure that you're relaxed and set up for success. Because when you're racing internationally, you're often racing against locals who don't have those extra challenges of time zone changes, maybe environmental, heat to acclimate to, and of course the gear and all the extra stress that comes with that. And I would actually say, though, that kind of all starts with how you pick your races. If you want to perform your best, if you're a more competitive athlete, you're probably better off to race locally. And if you do want to step it up, maybe, as North Americans say, if you want to go to the Alps where mountain running is very competitive, you might want to look at moving there for a couple of months and settling in and trying to become a local, train on the terrain and avoid the travel. Because as soon as you add in those time changes and the fatigue and all the stress of traveling, you're already at a disadvantage. So for me, that's less of a worry. I often, I'm not an uber competitive racer. I'm good for a top 10 percentile finish, but for me, it's sort of worth that sacrifice of the risk of traveling. But again, for some people, it might not be. You really have to consider all those variables.
Yeah, it's like if running 100 miles wasn't hard enough, then you got to add in all the acclimation, lost luggage, all these things. One last note about overseas. Have you ever experienced food poisoning or water poisoning or things like that? Because I know, some countries don't have, exactly the same either clean water access or you're not used to eating those kinds of foods. So what experience did you have with that?
Yeah, I have. I've several times. But not usually for races. I've been lucky that I haven't had a race get jeopardized for that. But yeah, I mean, I got sick in Peru. I got sick in Mexico, El Salvador. I even got sick in France recently. Something I didn't. So I made a film. We fast packed the Tour de Mont Blanc about 3 weeks before running UTMB. So that it's the same route, and we wanted to see the route during the day and really soak it all in before doing it during the race. And something that didn't make it into my film was that I actually got food poisoning the last night. And I didn't want to end the film on a downer. I didn't want that to become the focus. So I decided in the moment, this is not going to make it into the story. I always say films like that, documentaries aren't truth telling, they're storytelling. And you get to sometimes have some liberty with the story. We were at this refuge and I ate it must have been a sausage or something that was a little bit undercooked. I was the only one who got sick, but with food, it's actually food intoxication, they call it, when there's bacteria that doesn't get cooked out of the food. And basically, you just need to puke until that gets out of your system. And I was up all night. And I woke up in the morning, or I was up in the morning when Audrey woke up, and she's like, "How'd you sleep?" And I'm like, "Are you serious? You didn't hear me?"
Not at all.
I was out back puking. I didn't sleep at all. So then at that point, I had nothing in my system from the night before. I couldn't eat breakfast, and we had about 20 kilometers to finish off on the route with a pretty big climb. I had like no water in my system either, and it was a hot day on a hot route, like an exposed route, I should say. It was the hardest 18 kilometers I've ever run. And you wouldn't know it from the film, because every time I had to shoot, I had to suck it up and go, okay, let's
look pretty.
Let's play this up for the camera a little bit. And I'm trying to get footage, and I'm just suffering. And I now know what it's like, when people puke or they have an upset stomach during a 100-miler and they can't eat for hours. I now know what that feels like. And it's horrible. It's horrible. But fortunately, that's never happened to me during a race. That was just during a sort of a fun run. We could have bailed out if we had to, but I was able to push through. But it was horrible. I do actually, though, take, I can't remember what it's called, but there is a medication that's available here in Canada anyway that can help you with traveler's diarrhea. It can help you avoid that. It's something I take before I travel to a third world country. But it's just, that's one of the risks, it's one of the risks of traveling, eating new foods.
Part of the game.
For sure. Part of the game. Yeah.
So with your year of races, how do you go about planning that? Because obviously you work with Solomon, you have your own personal interests. You try and run, I believe, some races with Audrey as well. And then you mentioned sometimes getting invited to these races. So how do you kind of structure your calendar year of races?
Well, I mean, first of all, I try to pack in as much as possible. I'm lucky that I have a flexible schedule with running my own business. I can work remotely, and it's not quite a full-time job, so I have time to do other things. And so the first thing I do is sort of, I'll come up with a list of priorities for the year. I'm balancing out, maybe at this point, now that our channel has got some traction, I get invited to different events, and I balance that out with my existing goals. Sometimes there's overlap there, sometimes there isn't. I look at what Audrey's goals are for the year, and we kind of lay it all out and try to make it work. It's like a puzzle, right? So this coming year is a good example of a pretty complicated season. That we're trying to right now we're in the process of trying to figure it all out and make it all work. Something I didn't execute well on last year was I did a lot of traveling. My carbon footprint was quite high, so I'm trying to lessen that for this year. We're going to Europe once. I'm going for 3.5 months, and I'm going to stay there. I'm going to live there, and then come back in the fall instead of traveling around like I did this year.
Is that a way that you can kind of bundle things all together at once? You could do maybe multiple races while you're in Europe. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and again, it's not just even about that. It is also about limiting the amount of travel. Like, it's going to cost me more. I mean, traveling is expensive, but renting housing is also expensive. So, but in this case, it's limiting the amount of back and forth flying I'm doing. This last year, it kind of was coming. I was planning it as I went. I didn't sort of have my year mapped out in the same way. And so this year, I'm trying to again lessen my carbon footprint a little bit if I can. And then also, I mean, it'll give me an opportunity to pack in a little bit more because. Traveling it's hard on the body, and you got to work your training around it. So we're going to try to pack it in this year. It's, I think, also about whenever you're looking at this, goes for anybody looking at a schedule, you have to have A and B races, and not everything can be of the same importance. So I have one A race for this year that's I'm looking at possibly doing in October. And then I have a bunch of B goals that are kind of leading up to that. And I'm considering the rest of those as just training. And I think the reason it's important to know that kind of going in is if something was to happen, if I was to feel myself getting injured, or maybe it just doesn't go as planned, one of those B goals, then that's fine. Those are just B goals. And I got to focus on the main goal, that A goal for the year. I think the mistake some of us make is we have a bunch of A goals. We have a bunch of A races we want to do. And we try to pack that all into a single season. And it can be too much. It can be too stressful. It can be too hard on the body. It can lead to injury, which is actually where a coach comes in. I think, I do rely on a coach usually to help me with my programming, because I like having an outside perspective on how to structure my training. And then I can just trust the plan, and just work the plan, and not be always second guessing myself. But a coach can also provide perspective on maybe your goals are too aggressive. You're trying to pack in too much, and they can be that voice to say, maybe you want to pick 2 out of 3 of these races and just do them well instead of doing more and doing it less well.
Yeah, I think that's great advice on prioritization and just figuring out, what's of the most importance, and then working your way down from that, because otherwise you kind of are setting yourself up for just failure if you're setting your expectations extremely high, and anything less than that, feels like failure to yourself. Are you at liberty to say what that goal in the fall is?
I'm still, not yet. I'm still working it out with the race director, and it's sort of, So in a couple of weeks, I'll have hopefully my plans solidified. But I can talk about my first sort of, it's a more of a B goal leading up to that race, which is I'm going to go to England for the month of June, and I'm going to the Lake District, and I'm going to expose myself to fell running for the first time. I'm going to do a couple fell races, and I'm going to recce the Bob Graham Round course. So the Bob Graham Round is
the fell races.
It's a route that fell running is basically trail running, but it's doing it in the fells in the UK. They call it fell running. It's a little bit different though, because it tends to be off route. It's kind of run up that hill and then run back down and find the most effective route you can without breaking your ankle. And the terrain is, rooty. It's rocky and grassy and marshy.
Technical, yeah.
It's technical, but not technical. Like there's, it's off trail quite often. So it's a whole different thing. Honestly, I don't really know what to expect. All I know is that some of these runners are pretty fast, and I'm probably going to get my butt kicked.
Yeah.
But it'll be fun. And then I'm going to recce the route for the Bob Graham Round, which is my main goal there. And that's a 106-kilometer route going over 38 peaks. These aren't massive mountains, not like we have here in Vancouver, for example. They're a little bit lower, but they are all of a certain height. They're considered Munros, which is a minimum height requirement. And you have to do all 38 of these peaks in under 24 hours to be recognized as a Bob Graham Round completionist. So that's my goal. And I'm going to film the whole process. I'm going to recce the course. I want to really get to know the route and the peaks, and probably do some fast packing, some camping while I'm there. And then I'll run that on or around my 42nd birthday, that at the end of the month there, at the end of June. Bob Graham was 42 when he first did the round, and it's a very common thing for people to do it in their 42nd year. So that's
gotcha. Well, I'll have to look forward to watching that later on. I want to dig into the Namibia series, because I was just so drawn into it, because one, I'd never heard of the country in the first place, and then two, it was such a high quality, just Discovery Channel level. I think that's what I actually commented on the video, and a lot of people were commenting the same thing, was like the production quality of it and the storytelling was just phenomenal. And it was so immersive, not in just the race, but the people. You had characters and specific, racers you were covering throughout the series. So I guess break down how you got into running that race, and I guess just lay the groundwork for that race in general.
Well, first of all, thank you. And I'm really proud of that video series. Like, I think it came together really well, pretty much how I envisioned it. This all started with a conversation with the organization about my potentially doing their series. And I had reached out to them to express interest and showed them my work. And part of what I was looking for was somebody to partner with in terms of how I was going to actually approach the filming. I was looking at a few similar races as well, namely Marathon des Sables in Morocco, which is actually what these races are modeled after. It's a very popular stage race that runs through the desert in Morocco. But that's a massive event, and I knew it would be harder to sort of partner with the organizers. Whereas with Racing the Planet being a little bit more grassroots, the event sizes are smaller, the fields are smaller. What they agreed to, and they were excited to help me with, is that they would carry some additional equipment for me.
I was going to ask.
So these races are 7 days. Yeah, these races are 7 days, and you've got to carry all your stuff. So I'm talking all your food, all your any spare clothing, you know, all your emergency supplies. You're carrying that all for the entire week. The only thing you don't carry is a tent. They provide that. So the name of the game is like, how few calories can you get away with during the week? You know, what's the lightest gear you can bring? How dirty are you willing to get? Because you know, you're not changing your clothes. So I of course then couldn't be carrying a bunch of heavy camera equipment.
Yeah.
I was though carrying a GoPro and some spare batteries. But I knew to really execute on a well polished film, I'd want to have a higher quality camera to use in the mornings and in the afternoons and evenings after I'm done racing, as well as my drone. And so they agreed to carry my camera bag for me in between stages. It didn't affect my racing at all. I still carried all my mandatory gear. Plus, they had their own drone operators who were able to give me footage from during the race itself.
That's convenient.
And that was huge. That was huge. It wouldn't the film series wouldn't have been nearly what it was without that footage. It was, and because these landscapes are incredible, right? It's like another planet.
And it's the only way to really capture it. You can't just capture it just on ground. You do need that aerial view.
Totally, because especially with the GoPro, I mean, it's kind of all you see is a horizon quite often. I mean, there were some interesting rock formations, but there's a beauty in the vastness, the emptiness of desert, right? It's mountains are one thing, but deserts are beautiful in their own way as well. And so the drone footage really brought that to life. And so that was the other reason I was so excited to work with them, is they were perfectly willing to give me all that footage. And the drone operators even took a little bit of creative direction from me as far as what I was looking for. And then we did a similar approach here in the country of Georgia with my second event with them, whereas I was able to get this drone footage, which, again, really brings the race to life. So that's something that I'm looking forward. That's sort of the way I'm looking to work with race organizers in the first place, or I should say in the future. It's not just about helping to offset costs where I can. It's also about having that partnership where they're willing to help me bring that story to life. And usually that does mean getting some drone footage as kind of one of the main things. You compare that to a race like UTMB that I just did. I mean, I didn't partner with that organization. They're a massive organization. They don't yet know who I am, and it's hard to get a hold of their PR team.
Of course.
Maybe one day. But if you look at we still, I think, told a compelling story, but the production values weren't quite there like they would have been had I been able to get some of the drone footage, for example.
Yeah, well, I think it's a win-win because obviously you get a chance to, like you said, more than just offset costs, produce really high-quality films and produce it the way you want without sacrificing on quality or, just the hassle of trying to do that while actually doing the race itself. And then also they get the win and the benefit of, having a great film brought to or capturing that event, and then also having that showcased and the attention brought to people like me who may have never heard of the race in the first place. So with Namibia, you had to carry a lot of gear. What was the poundage you had to carry on you at all times again?
So, the minimum requirements are for a minimum of 2,000 calories per day. And I think I carried about 16,500 calories in total. My food weight, this is going back a ways, but I think my food weight was around 5 or 6 pounds. And then, of course, that gets lighter as you go.
Of course, yeah.
And then my gear as well, there's all this required gear you need. And so, again, the name of the game is to invest in lightweight gear.
Light stuff, yeah.
I have a bit of an ultralight kind of hiking and fast packing background. So for me, I had most of the gear I needed. And I did a stage race quite a few years ago, my first one, where I had to buy some stuff then. So I'm lucky in that I had a lot of that stuff, whereas some people, these races are a significant investment, especially if you're only doing one of them. So, but I was lucky in that I had a lot of that stuff. So my pack weight going into the race would have been around 15 and a half pounds, around 7 kilograms, including my food. And then that would have got a little bit lighter. My base weight was probably more like 9 pounds. Because as I said, I think I had about 6 pounds of food, plus water. So at times when I had a full liter and a half, I was at about 18 to 18 and a half pounds, I believe, which is approaching the limit. I think you want to be between 15 to 20 pounds when you're fast packing. 15 is great, or less. I usually try to get down to 12 or 13 if I'm doing just a weekend. 15 if you're doing more than a few days. But when you get up to 20 pounds, it's hard to run. Your pack is...
Yeah, that's what I noticed in the video,
You're jogging at that point. So, and some people had very heavy packs where, you can do these races. You can hike them. You can walk them. The cutoff times are generous enough. But if you want to be competitive, it's I wouldn't say it's a causational relationship, but there's definitely a correlation between the pack weight and the winning times. Generally, the winner has the lightest pack.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so since you've done backpacking in the past, did you feel like your body was able and had the strength kind of background to withstand that weight, or did you feel like your lower back was fatiguing a lot earlier on? You mentioned that running became a lot more difficult. I guess what was that experience, or were you used to that in the past?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's not even just about strength. I mean, you can get strength in the gym. You don't need to train with a heavy pack necessarily. But it's more about your running form changes when you have a heavy pack, which is why I think it is important to run with your pack. And again, it's not just about strength. It's about getting used to how you're going to have to run. It's very different. It's more of a stride. It's more of a shuffle, right? Than maybe the bouncier run that you might be used to. And so, I mean, I did some long, especially leading up to Georgia. Now for Namibia, I didn't actually train specifically for that race. That was a B race for me. I tacked it onto the end of my season. But for Georgia, I targeted that race, and I did some long runs up to about 60 kilometers. What is that? 35 miles, maybe?
Something like
34 miles.
Yep.
And with a fully loaded pack, or at least a partially loaded pack. So I did a few very long runs with packs. And I really trained specifically at the right pace. I was choosing my terrain to mimic what the race environment would be. And my results reflected that. Like I trained appropriately, and I placed much higher, second place instead of fourth place at Namibia. So going into Namibia, the one thing I did have though was I had done quite a bit of fast packing that season. Okay. So again, not training specifically for that race. It just happened that that's something I do quite a bit of. Yeah.
To wrap up with Namibia, the story that I thought was very captivating and interesting within the overall story was Vladmi dos Santos. And so do you want to touch on his story and your experience talking to him and hearing what he was doing?
Yeah, Vladmi is a super inspiring runner from Brazil, and he's a blind runner. And so he runs with a guide, meaning somebody is helping him. You know, he's obviously doing the physical part, but somebody's leading him through the terrain. And some of the terrain is fairly technical. So it's a real challenge. And he's done, I believe now, all of the 4 deserts. They call it the 4 Desert Series with Racing the Planet, as well as a couple of the special edition races they do. And a whole bunch of other stuff as well. But he's actually a fast runner too. He's not just a long distance guy. He's pretty well known back home. And he has some records for, like, for example, running around the track as a blind runner, and a few different things. He's a really inspiring guy, really nice guy too. And I'd love to work with him again and tell his story a little bit more in depth. You do meet him in the film, but I'd love one day to guide him through a race. And, work with him on that, and maybe even visit him at his home and see how he trains. And he unfortunately doesn't come from, he doesn't have the best economical situation, so he does look for support, and I think it'd be a good way to maybe drum up some support for him as well. So that's definitely on my radar, to try to work with him in the near future and tell his story a little bit more. But a lot of people were touched by his story for sure. And that was something that with the Racing the Planet series, the Namibia series, I should say specifically, like I met so many really inspiring athletes. Without giving it away, Rob's story is probably, for me, the most inspiring, just given what he went through and then how he performed in that race. And at his age. And so, and that's the thing about these stage races that's so different than a trail race, even a 100-mile race. I mean, you meet people on the trail, right? Whether it be UTMB or your local 50K, you do get to know people on the trail. At least I think you should. I always encourage people, like, make friends early, because you might need them towards the end of the race, right? You might end up teaming up with them to get through. But those relationships, I mean, they only go so deep, right? Because you're only out there for maybe that one night or for a few hours together. Whereas with a stage race, you're running together, and then you have all afternoon and evening to sit around the campfire, day after day for 7 days. And so you really get to know people. You become, you make some really good friends. And then a lot of these racers, they do multiple of these races, and they see the same people over and over again. So you further strengthen those bonds. And so that's where stage racing is such a different experience. You're really immersing yourself in an environment. You're cut off from communication at home. I mean, you can get emails, but that's it. Like, there's no cell phones allowed, and which is great, right? How often do we get to unplug to that degree for 7 days?
I've said that for
with
so long.
A great group of people, right?
Yeah. That's honestly, that's what, like, running does for me, even on like a road running level, because
Mm-hmm.
you can't pull out your phone and text or scroll on Instagram
No.
while you're running, right? You have to be in the moment and present. And as much as I have a lifting background and love lifting, a lot of times you have this, purposeful rest periods, and a lot of times people do
Mm-hmm.
pull out their phone. It's easy to check an email or this or that, but running, you're fully immersed.
Yeah.
So no, I get that completely. And drawing to a little bit besides the racing, a lot of the other things you do in the background that I was slightly aware of or assumed, but hearing more about is you manage your own video production agency. You also have is it still active? I was trying to like dig into it. Pacer Films.
Sort of a brand that I
Okay.
sort of on the side kind of makes films for brands as well,
Okay.
running related
Gotcha.
content. But
Gotcha.
yeah, I mean, I kind of I built my business, my agency for
Mm-hmm.
well, it's been 18 years now. Pretty much my entire working career has been focused on building this business,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I'm lucky now that it's become something that affords me the freedom to travel. I have a great team in place, a good business partner, and so it's really finally paying dividends in terms of not necessarily just money, but in terms of freedom, in terms of time, and that's really what I value more than money. I mean, what's
100%.
money without time, right?
Exactly.
And so but that's always been telling other people's stories, and I don't mean. I should say really telling business stories. It's making videos for businesses, and I knew I wanted to, with my time, I wanted to rededicate myself to my craft, because with that work, I'm mostly just managing a team. I'm not actually touching a camera and getting to work in the edit suite, which is why I started that business in the first place. And I realized that I don't want to just make other films for, like, say, Nike, although I'd love to make make a commercial for Nike or whoever, but I want to tell my own stories as well, or tell other people's stories, but through my own lens, through my own my own sort of perspective.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, what separates my content a little bit, is that, from, say, Billy Yang's, like, I'm friends with Billy and his content's amazing. But often it's more about other people's stories, and he doesn't insert himself into the story, which, I think it makes for really great films about other runners. But I think what I wanted to do, at least for the next couple of years, is tell my own story, or at least, again, through my perspective. So what's it like to run one of these races from on the ground, a firsthand perspective? Because not a lot of people are doing that, or at least not a lot of people, I don't think, are doing that well. They're not and so I think that's what sort of differentiates my content a little bit. But at some point it does get a little bit like repetitive, and that's where I do like to bring in other people's stories. And I think with that Namibia series, that I might have hit on something there where, maybe it's me meeting other people along the way and incorporating their story. But the through line is that it's my story as an athlete, which will evolve over time, I'm sure. And then one day I might go back to, this idea of producing content for brands or telling other people's stories exclusively. But for now, I'm really enjoying this idea of, like, how can I tell a firsthand perspective from the ground, from a race like UTMB, which you don't see quite often.
Yeah.
We're used to the slicker films, and again, we're used to Billy's films that tend to be more about the elite athletes. And I think people would like to see, what does it look like from closer to the mid pack.
Yeah, the average folk, and also, even from a first-person view, that's also what you provide, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really resonate with what you were saying, because on a smaller scale, for reference, I come from a video editing background as well. Got into it, a really young age, making fun films, blah, blah, as a kid. Developed these skills. Fast forward to now, I've worked for various hundreds of different real estate agents across the country. I work from home. Done that for about 5 years. And to your point, it offers you a ton of flexibility, which I love and appreciate. But there does need to be that balance, right, of, okay, money and career and things like that, but also still having that passion to make content that you're excited about and proud about. So I've kind of been in that process a little bit. I was in Virginia, just moved to Colorado over the summer. And part of separating myself and making this big move in my life was a little bit of trying to give myself more freedom and time to devote towards different passions, towards different projects, and just see where things can take me. Because a lot of times you can kind of get bogged down in the work and fear that if you give that up, that you're not going to be able to get it back later. Because I owned a gym, a strength training gym back in Virginia for like 2 years, and it was a goal at the time, to open this thing and make it successful. But I realized at this point it was kind of sucking a little bit of the life out of me, and I had my hands in too many pots, basically. And
Yeah.
so to bring things all together, it's good to hear your perspective and, honestly look at you as a case study of, hey, you can pull back a little bit and carve out more time for creative endeavors. And honestly, it'll end up probably coming back full circle with financial benefit in the long run and be more fulfilling in that way.
Yeah, and saying no to things is something I
Yeah.
think everybody struggles with. I definitely try to see. I've always seen my career and try to approach things from a perspective of abundance,
Yeah.
as opposed to a scarcity mindset, and that allows you to say no to things. To realize that, like you said, there's a fear, especially when you're a freelancer, say,
Yeah.
as well as when you're running a business. There's always a fear that that next client might not be around the corner.
Yeah.
And so you need to say yes to everything and make
You nailed it.
you
Yep.
need to you need to work with every client that comes through the door. And I think after a while, when you realize that that's not the case, if you try to operate from an abundance mindset, start to focus on what matters and prioritize, do less but better, do better work, focus on the work that's really important to you and making a difference, and not just chasing dollars. I think that's when things come together. And that applies again. It's like what we talked about with scheduling your calendar for racing, and
Yeah.
it's really prioritizing and thinking about maybe you don't do as much and travel as much. Focus on a couple of goals instead and just do them well. Maybe prioritize time for friends and family as well outside of running, which is something I struggle with. I tend to be quite focused on my running and maybe don't leave time for other things. So yeah, I think that it's I always say how you do anything is how you do everything. And
Yeah.
so the way you approach business and life and your relationships, it's kind of all the same.
Yeah, pivoting to actually filming a lot of these feats and races themselves. Maybe not the higher quality, prominent races you film, but regular weekly diaries and things like that you capture on YouTube. What are some equipment that you use or that you would recommend to someone that is looking to capture more of their training, their races, and things like that?
Well, the first thing I'd say is keep it simple.
Yeah.
Focus on story. And I say this as a professional who has access to some very high quality gear that I don't use, like gear from our agency. And when I made some purchases initially, when I started to put my kit together, as I was traveling more to make films for my YouTube channel, I was very conscious in not bogging myself down. Sometimes higher quality gear takes longer to set up. It's more cumbersome. It's heavier. It's less weather resistant. I mean, there's all these reasons sometimes to keep it simple. So for me, that means shooting almost exclusively on a GoPro. Even though I have these higher quality cameras, I have some friends who came from more professional backgrounds, and as they started filming their own adventures as well, some of them runners, they fell into that trap of thinking they needed to bring their big, DSLR.
They probably
with
found
them,
out real
and
quick, didn't they?
it holds you back, right? It
Yeah.
holds you back, and it changes. My goal is always to try not to change the experience too much. So the fact that I'm filming an adventure, I don't want that to affect the adventure negatively. I don't want to change the nature of that experience if I can. Sometimes it's inevitable. We end up, faking some shots and doing pickups or whatever. But it's got to be simple. GoPro, again, is, I can pull it out of my pocket, press a button, and it's recording. I don't have to worry about focus, exposure. It's automatic. And as a professional, that's painful sometimes. I want to be able to rack focus. But in that moment, I mean, if you've been on feet for 20 hours and you're racing and you're exhausted, you got to be able to keep it simple. You got to focus on what you're actually there to do, which is to run and maybe enjoy yourself or to compete, whatever it is. And the filmmaking comes second. So GoPro for me is the standard. Now, having said that, there are some settings and things I've used that I think definitely improve the quality without getting too technical. That's sort of, that's where, there's even technique to how do you hold a GoPro and film.
I was going to ask, there's the same 3 angles that I typically will use if I'm filming for, an Instagram shadows for that. I didn't know if you had specific ones or tips or go-tos with that.
Well, it's funny. I sometimes laugh at my own content. I get back, I'm like, it's so formulaic. I've got the POV shot.
Well,
I've
what
got
works,
the
I
reverse
guess.
angle.
Yeah.
And then you've got, I've got the shot of somebody else. I've got, my feet. I've got the panning shot.
Yeah.
But that helps though too. So this is, continuing on this idea of keeping it simple. It's finding formulas. It's finding shorthand, right? Shortcuts. And for me, that also is, I build my story in the shooting. I shoot for the edit. So when I get to the edit suite, I don't go, how am I going to edit this? I know. I go, yep, there's my establishing shot. I cut to my feet. I might like look to the right, and I'll do that on purpose. And then I cut to a shot of my angle from the right. And I'm doing all those in the moment without thinking, because I've just been doing it for so long. And then when I hit the edit suite, I just piece it together. It just falls into place.
So for most of your races,
that comes with time, right?
Yeah, not to cut you off. For most of your races, are you planning out, at least vaguely, the shots you want to hit, or are you kind of just, as you're doing the race, oh, that's a pretty view, I'm going to get that, or oh, this is a hard, steep part, I'm going to capture that?
Yeah, it depends. So if I've done the route before, I probably will plan it. And this includes even just when I'm filming an adventure. If I've done the adventure before, which is a best case scenario, then I know going into it what shots I want to get.
Yeah.
UTMB was a good example, because we filmed it during the Tour de Mont Blanc, and I was making mental notes as I went, like, okay, this is where I'm going to do. And in fact, I'm going to probably cut a film together, sort of a tongue-in-cheek comparison between the two, like TMB and UTMB, because I filmed them in so much the same way. Like a lot of the shots are carbon copy.
Yeah. Because
I used the Tour de Mont Blanc as sort of a dry run for the UTMB. So then when I was back there, I remembered, oh yeah, this was the place where I was going to film a slow-mo shot revealing the view that I know is coming up now. So I could change my frame rate to slow-mo and make sure there's a runner in front of me that I can film running.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I definitely kind of plan that out. I also sort of script out my scenes. I mean, again, this is about storytelling, right?
Yeah.
So I try to hit certain key moments, and I sort of know, like, yeah, okay, around this point, I'll do a little check-in. And at this point, there's themes I might want to hit. I might want to talk about, like I might want to talk about the aid stations or the weather, or, and I'll sort of plan that in advance to a degree. I'll sometimes even almost script it. I'll have like a cheat sheet, a list on my phone sometimes of things I want to say. So certainly to depending on the race, and if I've been there before, I'll do that to more of a degree. And then I was going to say that before, so I use GoPro primarily, but I've started incorporating an Insta360 as well, a 360 camera, I should say, really more generally. And that's provided me with a different angle. And so
I see a lot of people have I don't know, you can correct me if the GoPro can do it as well, but a lot of people I know will use the Insta360 because it has that invisible stick type of deal going on.
Yeah, it's got the invisible selfie stick. It's also just a nice wide angle, so I find that whenever I want to show me in a place, if I want to show how narrow a ridge is, then it's best to show that from above. Or if I want to show me bushwhacking, it's hard to get that on a narrow GoPro, but if I can zoom, it's almost like having a drone above you. Then I find the 360 works well. But I made a video about this where the 360 I think can be overused. So I see the 360 camera as being like a drone, in that it can be too much of a good thing sometimes. So I think that the power of a camera like that is to use it sparingly. And then when you do cut to that angle, it's like, oh, wow, what's this, right? As opposed to filming an entire 45-minute video with that distorted wide angle, which can get a little bit nauseating after a while.
Yeah, can't have ice cream for every meal.
No, exactly. There you go. So I think that's, again, keeping it simple is starting with the GoPro and then layering in these additional angles, drones, 360 cameras, but kind of building on that over time. But first and foremost, it's story. And this is all about, storytelling also is about, it's telling a story visually. So it's not just telling a story as in literally narrating. It's visual storytelling. So for me, again, I'll think about consciously in the moment. If I stop and talk to the camera, I'll film a shot of my feet walking and starting to run again, because I want to tell you that, okay, now I'm running again. And then when I cut to the POV shot, it feels like I'm running. Whereas if I cut right from my face to POV, it feels like I'm still walking. So, thinking about, when I film my feet, it's usually because I want to show you, okay, now I'm walking. Okay, now I'm running again. Or now I'm on muddy terrain. Those are very conscious decisions when I cut to that angle. Or if I show, a reverse angle, I'm trying to show that, okay, there's somebody right behind me. And I'm saying it in that moment for a reason. So thinking about how you tell the story visually, it's almost like, and as well what the scenes are, structuring your story in scenes. It's easier done in retrospect because you'll know how your race went. For example, you can say like, okay, well, I went out too hard for the first, I went out too hard for the first 25K. I blew up, my stomach got upset. And then I rallied and I passed a bunch of people and finished. So if you think about that sort of story structure, those are each moments, those are scenes that you need to document. And you want to build up some dramatic tension. Maybe you want to foreshadow. I coached Audrey in this heading into UTMB. I reminded her, if you feel like you have like a sort of a tight hamstring, talk about that on camera, because you never know. I said, heaven forbid, like later on, you might have to drop because of your hamstring. And you don't want that just to come out of the blue. I'd want to show that earlier in the story, and you'd be like, my hamstring kind of is tight. I hope that doesn't come back to haunt me. We want to build some dramatic tension. So, I mean, these are the things you're thinking about when you're trying to document a race. And it is a distraction, right? You have two projects going. For me, though, I find it's a healthy distraction. It can help me take me out of that. I can hover above myself, and the pain becomes part of the story I'm trying to tell.
I like that perspective. Yeah.
Right. So I actually find it helps me get through these moments, and I just enjoy the storytelling process so much that when I do have a bad race, again, I can flip the script and say like, well, hey, I guess this story is about how I blew up.
Yeah. Well, it almost puts you in the storyteller position where you're telling the narrative of your own story. So it's like, do you want this story to end in a DNF, or are you going to find a way to fight through this? And that not only makes for a great video, but it puts you
and
in
either way, it's a great story.
Exactly.
Right?
It
whether
puts
I
you
rally
in the,
or not.
Controller seat. Exactly.
There you go. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to get your thoughts on was, because I don't know if you've had a lot of experience of doing this in the past, but I know following a lot of your training diaries last year was strength training. And I know you did this with a personal trainer, but, what are your thoughts with strength training with runners? Because a lot of times, some people are adverse to it. I know, I'm sure, are you familiar with Jason Koop?
Yep.
Yeah, so he's a very sciencey guy. He's still kind of anti-strength training, or isn't like super big into it. But then there's a lot of people like Sally McRae, is a big advocate of it.
Sally is huge on it, of course. Yeah. It's funny. It really is split. The evidence seems to suggest it's less important than we think, but anecdotally, a lot of us would tell you otherwise. I've sort of done a little bit of strength training here and there over the years because coaches told me I should. And but the thinking is that it helps to the theory is that it helps to avoid some of the imbalances that we create as runners. We tend to be very hamstring dominated. We tend to have weak glutes. It creates imbalances. Imbalances can lead to injury. Now that's hard to study over a long term. How do you study over a career, say, runners who don't strength train versus others while controlling for all these personal factors like genetics and environment? So I think that's one reason why I would argue why the science hasn't yet supported it. Yeah. But then anecdotally, there's examples of people not strength training with huge success, like Kilian Jornet, the greatest mountain runner ever to live, doesn't do strength training. But having said that, he's still pretty young. Like, I think
anecdotes
early
are
30s.
tough too, because if you look at like Courtney Dowalter, right, never has a coach, kind of just goes by the seat of her pants, things like that. So those are strange cases, but that's why they're winners, I guess, right?
Well, and Kilian, like I always kind of joke, like I bet you when he turns 40 and starts to get injured, he's going to start strength training. Yeah. So I would say, like, I mean, for me, I'm turning 42 this year, so I consider myself an older athlete at this point, and an aging athlete at least, let's say. And so for me, strength training is about keeping myself in the game. Like I've got big goals over the coming decade, and for me to keep doing the amount of mileage and travel and all the stuff that I'm doing, putting these demands on my body, I feel like I just need to strength train to mitigate those risks. It's not necessarily about getting faster. It's just about staying in it. And then, of course, though, there are benefits to strength training for getting faster. But I think that one thing I would sort of say, though, is that, I think the philosophy I try to follow is that strength should never get in the way of your running. So if you're strength training to run, you should never do like a hard strength training session the day before doing a speed work session where you're then going to jeopardize your ability to maximize that speed work session. It should support your running and not the other way around. If running is your primary goal. And that's where I think maybe some people, approach it more like strength. They're going to strength train to run, and that's not it. It's a side thing. Yeah. But it is an important side thing. So for me, I I strained my hamstring. I tore my hamstring, I should say, 2 years ago, leading into my 2021 season. And I had some imbalances. I'm not sure exactly what caused it. It was a sudden thing during a run, and it put me out for weeks. I couldn't even walk for the first couple of weeks. And then I had to
I've partially torn mine
run.
before. I feel it. Yeah.
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible, right? Like I had a grade 2 hamstring, and they say grade 3 you need surgery. So it's like it was bad, right? And so when I came back from that, I knew I had to strengthen it just to
rehab
be able to
it.
run again, just to rehab it. Yeah, exactly. I went to physio. I started working with a strength trainer, and that's what set me back on the path of consistent strength training, because I had just turned 40, or I was 39, and I realized, okay, I should just keep doing this. This is something I should and can keep doing at my age. So again, I think it's, I don't know. I'd say if you're pushing 40 and you, especially if you're injury prone, do 2 days a week of strength training. I mean, do yourself a favor. If you want to look at the data, the science, well, no, it doesn't necessarily support it. And there's certainly anecdotal evidence to suggest that it's not important. But in my experience, it's been huge. I came back from my injury without a hint of hamstring issue after that. And I've gone on to have an injury-free 2 seasons now. Yeah. And I just feel good. Like I just feel good when I can lift something with, a little bit of upper body strength.
Exactly.
And I can run with a 20-pound pack. Right. So there's just, I think strength training is both underrated and overrated, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think moderate amount of strength training is really important for any runner.
Yeah, for runners, I think you should look at it from 2 perspectives. Is like the idea of like maintenance and, like you said, kind of that preventative caution for injuries, and just making sure that everything is working how it should. And it kind of gives you some cognization too of your hamstrings working, your glutes working, and so that when they aren't working, or when something's sore, and how to mediate certain things. And then the biggest thing is injury prevention. There are, like you said, some people might get some performance benefits of it, especially if you're doing some real steep terrain. You might really want to strengthen your quads and glutes and so forth. But the injury prevention to me is just so clear that maybe exact runners might be difficult to study, like you said, over time. But just thinking about bone density, right? A lot of strength training, especially as you get older, as you mentioned, into your 40s, but even earlier, building up strong, healthy bones, strong, healthy joints. You're only going to get that through strength training and weight bearing and things of that nature. So to me, it's kind of like a no-brainer. But like you said, it doesn't have to be, a bodybuilder workout, a powerlifting workout, hard leg days. Honestly, it's funny too, because like if you just think about general health, what is like the minimum benefit to get benefits from strength training? It's minimal stuff. It's really lightweight. It's like a 10-pound kettlebell, probably just do a couple exercises a week. So if you take that principle and apply it to running, you don't have to do these full workouts. You could literally just do 2 30-minute workouts with a 20-pound kettlebell, some really light stuff. You probably barely break a sweat, but you're still going to get a lot of the benefits that you would be neglecting if you didn't do anything at all. So I'm glad you have that same experience.
Yeah, and sometimes it's about mobility. It's about body awareness as much as strength. And so there's, I work with a personal trainer, and you definitely don't have to. I can afford to, and so I figure, why not give myself,
of course,
every edge I can. And I just love showing up and just not having to think. Like tell me what to do, and I'll do the work. I'll work hard, right? If somebody that is there to hold me accountable. And also I have to book those sessions in advance, which for me is important. Because otherwise, strength training, I put it off. I got to book these weeks in advance, so I'm committed. But sometimes I'll show up and I'll say, look, I just did, I've got a race coming up, or I just did a hard session yesterday. I'm pretty sore, and I'll notice it when I'm warming up and go, okay, look, my left hamstring's feeling a bit tight. Let's do some mobility work maybe. And my coach will work me through that. So sometimes it's your strength session can be the time for you to check in with your body and to do maybe one day more mobility, less strength. And so it's kind of it's the foundation, it's that foundational stuff. But again, you don't want it to negatively impact your running either. So it can, you have to be careful. You don't want to hurt yourself in the gym either. So so sometimes less is more, for sure.
Absolutely. To wrap things up, you kind of touched on a few items throughout, our chat together, but what's next for you as far as next year, especially with it being like the new year? Maybe it's a great chance to talk about resolutions in a sense, but, there's specific, more than just races. Like what are some specific goals or things you'd like to accomplish? It could be, certain objectives with your YouTube channel or how you'd like to position, work-life balance. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, this project I have in England next year is kind of a new thing for me, where I want to immerse myself in these experiences a bit more. Where I want to, I'm going to go there, I'm going to live there, I want to meet people and like exist in that running community for a month and accomplish this big goal. I don't want to just fly in for a race and leave. And I think that's the direction I'd like to go in with my life and traveling and, with Audrey, is us kind of moving places and saying, let's go to, say, South Africa and just like, let's do comrades and let's just experience it all, right? Yeah. And then maybe say, okay, we've kind of now experienced that. Let's move on to the next thing, but really immerse ourselves in these things. And I think that'll make for better storytelling as well. I want my films to become more like travel documentaries. Again, not just about the race, but about everything that leads up to it. And, but I think again, less racing, I think long-term, and more adventures. I've got this long list of fast packing I want to do. all these routes I want to do. Nolan's 14 in Colorado. I've got long-term goals like racing hard rock, but to me, doing like Nolan's or doing the Bob Graham Round is so much more exciting. Yeah. So that's something that, I'm hoping to check more of those off my list. I am, though, looking to do a 200 miler again next year. That's probably going to be my A goal. Again, I'm just trying to decide which one, but I haven't done a 200 plus mile race for a few years, and I think I'm ready to tackle that again. Get back into that, yeah. Get back into that. So, and then I really just want to keep growing my YouTube channel. I've been seeing some success. I think I like to think that, like you said, I have some untapped potential on the channel. Where, certainly. If more people could be exposed to it, I could grow a bit more. And so probably one way I'll do that is with some collaborations with other creators. I'm going to probably work with Ben Parks when I go to England, for example. Maybe meet up with him, and I know that's a good strategy to grow, and maybe mix it up a little bit too by working with other collaborators. So that's sort of something I'm looking at for next year.
A lot of times I feel like, in your example specifically, the content, the quality, it's obviously there, the consistency, it's all there. But a lot of times, unfortunately, with whether it's TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, whatever it is, you got to play the trends a little bit. You got to put in, searchable keywords and, clickbaity titles in some sense. But I do feel like at the end of the day, the true gems eventually emerge to the top, ascend to the top, and people will eventually find them. And collaborating is a very genuine, honest, and valuable way to accomplish both, I think, in that sense. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and I really am. I'm on the fence about this strategy, but I'm about to commit, I think, to this idea of making less content, but better content, but also more focused on the stories and less on the, like you said, the clickbait stuff.
I think that'll pay off.
Yes, that's the formula, but it's not as rewarding for me. And I want people to... I want people to be inspired. I don't want to just, be pushing Amazon affiliate links. And but the funny thing is, like when I was doing UTMB, I had, I think at least, 3 or 4 people say, "Hey, you're Jeff. I bought this headlamp because of you."
Oh, really? That's
like
funny.
Things like that, where they knew me from my reviews and stuff. So again, it works. But my kind of philosophy, I think, going into this year is going to be, for my channel, is going to be that I want to make every video be something that everyone would watch.
Oh, okay.
So I want to think of my audience as one person, and I want every video. I don't want it to be that I like his reviews but not his films, or his films but not his reviews. I want it to be that when you subscribe, you're looking forward to every video I publish.
Yeah.
And that probably means doing less of the technical review stuff, less of the top 3 reasons why, or the 7 tips for, and really just focusing on high quality content. Because I think that's the evergreen stuff. That's the stuff that, 10 years from now, hopefully will still exist on the platform. That's the stuff that I end up feeling really proud of. And it sort of serves as, it's like a diary for myself. It's something I can look back on years from now.
Yeah, you're kind of building your own portfolio. Yeah,
totally. I like that. Totally.
So where can people find you?
Well, best place is on YouTube. If you search for Jeff Pelletier, you can go to jeffpelletier.com.
Pronounce it right.
Pelletier.
There you go.
And on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram as well, J Pelletier. Instagram and YouTube are the 2 best places.
Awesome. Well, go check him out. Like I said, I highly, highly, highly recommend any of the films, basically, that he has on his YouTube channel. And obviously stay in touch on Instagram as well. Share the podcast if you guys enjoyed it. And I will catch you guys in the next one.